I am going to start off the presentation today with Microsoft Azure SQL Premium, and I'll go over a little bit about what it is. So to start out, a little bit about Talon is a project-based application development consulting firm founded in 1985, so we've been around for almost 30 years, delivering projects to just about 600 clients. We are made up of about 120 technical consultants, and we do work ranging from strategy, architecture, integration with everything from the Microsoft stack with Microsoft BizTalk, SQL Server, Power BI, Microsoft Azure. We also have a user experience team that will help out with all of our front-end development and making sure that all of our applications that we write and for people have the best user experience possible. We are a Microsoft National Solutions Provider. We're one of about 35 in the United States. And on our staff, we have some MVP authors, some Microsoft Virtual Technical Specialists, and we have 5 gold certifications with Microsoft in application development, collaboration and content, which is mostly SharePoint, application integration, business intelligence, and ALM. And we have a national presence where Hartford, Connecticut is our headquarters. We also have offices in Boston, Santa Ana, Tampa, New York, and Washington, D.C. So with that, I'm going to start off today by explaining what as a service means. Is a lot of people, whenever we talk about Azure, we talk about the cloud, you always hear as a service. And there's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And infrastructure as a service is just kind of what you would expect it to be. It's infrastructure that's hosted inside of an environment. It runs much like Hyper-V in your own environment today. Then the next thing, the jump is to platform as a service. Platform as a service is where you have kind of a boxed type, what I like to call a box type application, where you're responsible for the application and the data, and everything else is handled for you, meaning that the networking, the infrastructure, the virtual machine that's running on, you don't have to worry about all of that. That's held by, in this case, by Microsoft, and they maintain and support all of that. And then the last piece is software as a service. And software as a service is something like Microsoft Office 365, where you just log in and it just works. You just log in and you use it. You consume what's out there. And I was listening to a presentation a couple weeks ago, and there was a very good implementation of as a service as it pertains to pizza. And this is one that goes out very well to our non-technical folks. So if you were to think of traditional on-premise stuff today and you equate it to pizza and you made it at home, you would have to have a dining room table, soda, electric gas, oven, fire, pizza dough, everything for the cheese to make the pizza. You're in charge of it all, and if you don't have any of those, then you're not going to be able to have your pizza. So if the next tier up would be the infrastructure as a service, whereas, and this equates to a take-and-bake pizza, that you would go somewhere and they will have the pizza dough, the tomato sauce, the toppings, and the cheese, and you take it home to bake it, to have it for dinner. The next one would be platform as a service, and this would be equivalent of having pizza delivered. If somebody makes the pizza for you and brings it to you, all you have to do is take it into your house and eat it. And then the last part of it is that if you had software as a service, this equates to dining out for pizza, where you go somewhere, you order pizza, it's given to you, and all you have to do is eat it. So, as I said, in here, all of the blue is managed by you. So if you did traditional made at home, you have to have all of the cheese all the way through the dining room table. And then as you get into less and less managed by yourself, it makes it a little bit easier for you to have pizza and move on your merry way. So that's a lot of the analogies of as a service. And what I'm going to start to talk about today is SQL Premium, Microsoft Azure SQL Premium, which you can equate to database platform as a service, is when you are running SQL Premium or Azure SQL at all, you don't have to worry about all of the virtual machines or anything that's running behind it. You're just worried about the database and the data that's in it. And this is very appealing to some people that are doing different things. And a lot of people will ask me, you know, should I take, or I see Azure SQL and it doesn't do everything that my on-premise SQL server does. How do you expect me to move my accounting system database to Azure SQL? And my response to that most of the time, and almost all the time, is I don't expect you to do it. Azure SQL works well in many cases, and there's some cases that it just doesn't work well, or it's not going to work for your type of implementation. But if you do have other sorts of implementations, such as like proof of concepts, or somewhere where you might need to spin up a database really quick that you don't have capacity on your servers, it's a very good way to spin something up, do proof of concepts. A lot of people are doing them now. If you have a large marketing campaign going out, you can spin up a database really quick, use it. When the marketing campaign is done, you get rid of it. One of the good things about SQL Azure is that you only pay for what you use. So you don't have that leftover hardware sitting there, and you don't have the leftover licenses for SQL Server that are just sitting there taking up space or using up resources that otherwise wouldn't be used if you were all done. So the first thing that I want to bring up here is the levels of service for Azure SQL. When Azure SQL was first released, Microsoft guaranteed a 99.95% uptime. And the one problem with that was they didn't guarantee any performance returns. So there was some time when Azure SQL first came out, there were queries that you could run, and it would take 1 second. You would run it again, it would take 5 seconds. You'd run it again, it would take 20 seconds. Then you run it again, it takes 1 second. So they guaranteed the uptime, but they didn't guarantee any performance on it. And that was one thing that was a real downer for anybody that was using it, because they could never predict the performance of their application. So that was the beginning when they had web in business tiers, and those right now are retired. And if anybody is using those, you can still use them, but going forward, they're pretty much phased out, and you'll be moving all of your stuff that is on the web and business tiers to either the basic, the standard, or the premium tier. And the lowest is the basic tier, which it provides good performance, predictability for a database hour over hour. Some of the things that do well on this are smaller e-commerce sites that might be running that don't have a whole lot of transactions on them, or just like proof of concept type of things. It works fantastic for. You can spin up a database, you can use it, and it's pretty predictable. The next one is standard, which is obviously a little bit better than the basic, and it will work well with multiple concurrent requests. A lot of people are using these now for web applications that are not super high transactional, but they're pretty well used for types of applications that users would be on using it 8 to 5, and there's not a lot of batch processing going across them. And now they came with SQL Azure Premium, and Premium is the end-all be-all of their performance, and they set it up into tiers of P1, P2, and P3. And the way that they do the performance on those is P1 would be X performance, P2 is 4 times the P1, and P3 is 8 times P1. So these ones are using, the applications that are using these are the higher transaction applications. We have one client that is using it to pull oil and gas wells. It pulls about 35,000 oil and gas wells continuously, taking readings from the devices that are on the gas wells, getting back the data about what's happening at each of those oil and gas wells. So before SQL Premium came out, we were using Azure SQL to do the same thing, and the performance and predictability of it was terrible. But since they've released Azure SQL Premium with different service tiers, they've been able to guarantee that you have certain database throughput units, and I'll get into that in one moment. So the service level defined is something called a database throughput unit. And the database throughput unit is really a representation of the CPU, the memory, and the read-write rates of the machine that it's running on. In BASIC, we'll provide you one database throughput unit. Standard has two different tiers that are S1 and S2 that will offer you 5 or 25. And then the Premium does 100, 200, and 800. So database transaction units in a language that you understand, everybody really wants to see what kind of transactions per minute it will perform. And on BASIC, it will perform about 3,500 an hour. Standard, it will do 28 to 1,500 a minute. And then on Premium, it'll do up to 730 transactions a second. And I put on here, this may not be 100% accurate for all applications, but this is just some benchmarking that Microsoft has done across the different tiers that they supply. Whereas I said before, you get a lot of predictability and uniformity through these, where before you could run the same query 5 times in a row and have it range from anywhere from 2 seconds to 15 seconds, and you would be looking at the explain plan on the query, and it came out the same every time, and you could never figure out why it was happening. And this is one thing that in cloud computing they kind of attribute to a noisy neighbor, that a lot of people, when they first started to use Azure SQL, is they were taking benchmarks of the absolute best times of queries running. And what they were doing is, looking at, hey, at 2 o'clock in the morning, my machine is processing, 30 transactions a second. But at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's only processing 4 or 5, because the way that they used to do it was, say if you were sharing a database with multiple tenants on the same machine, you each have, if there's 3 people, you each have 30% of the processing power. If the first 2 people on your tenant all go home at 5 o'clock, it'll start to allocate some of that processing to the third. And so you might be getting 80 and 90% processing power because the other 2 things on your tenant aren't doing anything. But once they come online and start processing again, then you get cut back down to your 30%. So a lot of people were taking benchmarks of their absolute best performance, which wasn't really the real performance time. So a lot of people say, what are the limitations of SQL Azure? And one of the things that it has is that it doesn't support Windows login, that everything has to be through SQL Server authentication. It must always run SSL, and the database service is only available through port 1433. So as people start to see different ways that they have their internal things set up, these are some of the things that you need to start to account for as you think about using SQL Premium and go into SQL Azure in general. These are some limitations / architectural constraints that would be on all of the SQL tiers. Some of the other things that it doesn't do are that it doesn't support SQL jobs or SQL agents. One of the things that a lot of people run into is that it does not support distributed transactions. So if any of these things are requirements of your database, then you're going to have to run this in-house or in infrastructure as a service. And the last thing that is not really a limitation but more of a performance enhancement to make sure that you don't clobber your neighbor is all of the SQL Azure databases have to have clustered indexes on them when you create them, or it'll let you create them, but it won't let you use them if there's no clustered index on them. So some of the benefits of it, one of the big benefits that I see of SQL Azure is that you really don't have to maintain a SQL server anymore. I can't tell you how many times that we've been working doing a proof of concept or doing a test or just doing something where all of a sudden all of your log files run up, you run out of disk space. That really doesn't happen with SQL Azure anymore. All of that stuff is controlled for you. It's not like you have a limited amount of disk space to use. One of the other things is that you can make your databases geo-redundant so that if it goes down, you have copies of your data in multiple data centers so that if you were able to, if your database went down, you could pull it up in another region with the geo-redundancy. One of the newer things that they have in it is the point-in-time restore is that you can bring it back up just as you would with any other database on-premise, that you couldn't do that before. And one of the great things about it is that you can easily move between tiers with an alter statement or with the portal. If you realize that one of our clients is a real-life example is they have, every so often, they have a ad that will go out on Good Morning America and say, at this time, you'll have a 20% off coupon with this code. And you can imagine that when something goes on TV on Good Morning America, your e-commerce site would get absolutely crushed. So when they do know that they have those ads going out or a marketing blast that's gonna hit thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, even millions of people, we can easily bump up the tier of SQL Azure to be able to have the highest premium tier and run that for the weekend, and then when everything calms back down on Monday, put it back to the tier that it was at before. And that kind of all happens to you behind the scenes, is it'll spin it up on a different machine, get everything to where it needs to be, then switch it over to that newer, bigger machine. It will run as soon as it's done. As soon as you're done with that size tier, you can alter it and put it back down to a smaller tier, and you only pay for what you use. And where normally that would, if you had to do that on your own infrastructure, that would be costly, and a lot of people just really flat out can't do it because they don't have the hardware or the wherewithal to be able to move a database for just a weekend and then have it come back down. And as I said, it's pay for only what you use. And one of the things that's great about that is that if you do have something like that, you may increase your sales over the weekend they've increased their sales by 125% over a weekend, and it is a much more expensive for the premium tier, but it was well worth it in the long run because they didn't have to buy a bigger, beefier server to be able to run that just for a weekend. And some of the things that you can do with it is you can connect to SQL Azure with any of the tools that you normally would. You can connect with Visual Studio, you can connect with SQL Server Management Studio, you can connect with a web interface. So now I'm just going to jump into a quick demo of how you can use SQL Azure Premium. So inside of the Azure portal, we have SQL databases, and this SQL Premium demo database is the one that I've created for this demo. And right now I have this just running in the Southeast Asia data center. The dashboard here will show a little bit performance of the database. You can see as things are going, you can see what it's doing. And the one thing that I want to show you is that right now I have a project in Visual Studio that's just a little application that is a registration for a school. So I also have the database project in here. So right now I have my Visual Studio connected to the database in SQL Azure, and you can run queries against the SQL Azure database just as you would any other database. Through Visual Studio, I have this one connected through SQL Server Management Studio. We can run the same queries. And this is all connecting to SQL Server in Microsoft Azure. And then the last thing that I'm going to show is the application that we have. And this is connected. This is just a small application that we have running in Microsoft Azure. And all of the different functions inside of it are all running backed up by the SQL Azure database. And I just went and created a new user. We can go back into here and see that it was created up on the database that's running inside of SQL Azure. One of the things that is inside of this application is it's a simple web application, and one of the things that's great for quick sort of proof of concept demos or for doing a new web application is it's all one-click deploy with Microsoft Azure. I have the web application here that we can right-click and publish, and it will publish the web application as well as the database that's attached to this web application. And everything is done with a one-click deploy. So like I said, it's great for doing if you have some sort of small application that you want to use to get your feet wet with Azure and with SQL Azure. It's a great tool that you can get something up and running pretty quickly and at the click of a fingertip using all of the tools that you usually do use.